You fool! Warren is dead.
Welcome once again to HorrorBabble. We return today with a bit of diary horror, the little-known story The Source of It, by the little-known author Glen Malin. This one was first published in the July 1953 edition of Weird Tales, and was described with an excerpt from the story itself. Looking for the first time at a tremendous black shadow that seemed to dominate tongue and head. Intriguing. We hope you enjoy this one, folks. The Source of It, by Glen Malin. April 16. I must find some way of expressing myself and the truth. There is a conspiracy against me that is threatening my absolute ruin, and has left me utterly confused. This confusion, however, does not apply to those forces against me, for I know who they are. Mr. George, my competitor in the grocery business, is one of them. As I gave him the keys to my store, he tried to look grave, but inside of him there was a laughter directed against me. In his eyes was a triumph, and even in his fanged smile I could detect a terrible appetite finally appeased. He had fought me, won, and all he said was, "Rotten luck, Sam." No, I know who my enemies are. That is not what confuses me. Sometimes my wife is one of them, as her eyes quietly question and oppose me. There are things she will not say, but I know at last that she is really against me. Perhaps I am overly sensitive, but there are times when I see the hostile faces in a crowd, I feel the old bewilderment. Why are they all against me? All my life I have kept my business practices clean, my marriage pure. The only honest conclusion I can arrive at is that they are trying to make me in their own image, corrupt and evil. Yes, evil, that must be it. They are evil. I am good, and evil has triumphed. My business is gone. My wife is beginning to stare endlessly at me at supper time. How contemptuous she is! But I shall preserve my soul against them all. With the help of God, we may eventually win. If only I knew the source of evil on earth, which has malignantly spread to nearly all the people, and is fishing for me at this very moment. If only I could be shown the way out of this dark pit. I stand ready to fight, but I have no equipment, and I do not know how to get it. I must have some way of expressing myself. April 17. A miracle. It must have been a miracle. All last night I prayed for it, and now it is mine. I must be cautious, though, or others will detect my new powers. Today I walked all over town, in the offices, stores, bars, and on street corners, anywhere people will gather. I was going slowly, taking it easy, allowing my new talents to assert themselves. And I looked into hundreds of faces. Immediately I found the evil. The confusion is gone. God has allowed me to look beyond the flesh and bone, into the recesses of the brain. There I saw in every head a dark shadow that slithered about the brain. And when they talked, the shadow hovered about the tongue, and lies came out. "Oh, I can't go out with you tonight, George. I have some extra work at the office." And George said, "Well, all right, Doris. I'll bet you work pretty hard." Lies, all lies. But I can fight it now, and I need not fear my enemies. I did make somewhat of an error, though. Yes, in my enthusiasm, I told my wife everything, except the fact that I have super X-ray eyes. She looked incredulous for a moment. Then her face softened into almost a kindliness, reminiscent of the Kate I once knew. "Sam, this has been a strain on you, dear. You'd better get some rest." She walked over to where I was sitting, expecting me to kiss her. I saw the shadow gliding around her head, that slippery black evanescence. "Aren't you going to kiss me good night?" she said. "Lies, lies," I said, but I couldn't expect her to understand. My powers were too much for anyone to grasp. She stared at me in the same way as before, except that she bit her lower lip. "Sam, I don't know about you. You'd better get some rest. Kate isn't really so bad. Her shadow is not as large and ugly as some I have seen. But it is there, small or large. The enemy." I brushed her aside and went into the next room. At supper she did not speak a single word, but I was quick to notice the cunning glances she stole at me. All the contempt was back. I do not think she believes my powers, which is so much the better for me, but I must be more careful in the future. April 20. I am getting closer to it. I now believe the source of it is in this city. Thus far I have not found anyone whom I can work with, whose brain and soul is uncontaminated except my own. Today I thought I had found the source of it. He had the largest shadow of anyone I have yet encountered. As I wanted to study the thing, I opened the conversation, seeking to detain him. He was outwardly genial, but from my observations the really evil ones are always engaging personalities. "This one is on me," I told him. "Well, sir, I thank you," he said. But his smile didn't fool me now. The shadow was in full possession of that utterance. As he sipped, I noticed he eyed me almost casually with the hard glint of his pupils, trying to figure me out. I knew he was afraid of me. "Got to run now. Appointment, you know," he said, not even daring to face me. He pushed back his stool and left hurriedly. "Lies, lies," I muttered, but he had left. His fear of me was genuine, though, which is why I do not think he is the real source. But he is close to it. The real source would not be afraid. Somehow I have never formulated a plan for dealing with the real source. April 22. Events are shaping quickly. From exhaustive studies of various areas in our town, I can now reveal that it is in my immediate neighborhood. All last night I prayed for guidance as Kate snored stupidly in the next room. She would never understand, poor shadow-ridden soul that she is. But it is in my power to help her, as it is to help Mr. George and all mankind. Poor Kate! Now she misunderstands my gift of vision. Today she called in a doctor. They were waiting for me as I came in, leering at me quietly. This doctor is a cool one, with his brain half consumed with the shadow. He gave me a physical, pronouncing me unusually fit. "I don't understand." He kept shaking his head. But I knew he did, and his subsequent questioning showed he understood, partially at least. "When did you first take up this, street walking?" I was quick to see the trap. "Oh, about a week ago, I guess." I smiled straight at him. "Why do you do this, Sam?" "May I call you Sam?" Oh, he was an oily, ingratiating one. "Of course," I said. "I walk the streets for my health." I lied. "And a good cause, of course." "But your wife said—" He caught himself. "My wife, sir, well, says a lot of things." The doctor then gave a shrug and moved out into our gallery. My wife had already excused herself, saying, "I want to get some air." But I knew she lied, that she really wanted to have a chat with the doctor, secretly. Oh, I know they are hatching some plot against me, but it doesn't matter. I have God on my side, and with just a few more days I shall have the source of it. Just a few more days. April 26. These have been trying days. My wife has nearly undone me. Oh, I suppose I underestimated her, but I didn't think she would move so quickly. I was right about that plot on our gallery, but how could they have gotten me committed so quickly? Well, there is no use complaining now. All my previous work is undone. But there is one thing I can still do. Observe. At least, too, I am near home. This is comforting. My observations have not been so objective, due, undoubtedly, to my overwrought condition. But in time my vision will clarify itself again. However, Roseridge is such a small place, with so few faces to analyze, that I fear that I shall never even get near the source. Also, it is difficult to pray in this dormitory, with all these pitifully deranged people about me. The nurses and doctors don't mind my praying or my walking about the dormitory on observations. No, they don't mind me. I think the proper word is humouring. If only they knew my plan. All the people I have observed, albeit cursorily, thus far are contaminated, especially the doctors with their stupid questioning. I can also reveal that I interest them. April 27. Well, this has been a day, I can tell you. First I met Tweed, and secondly, I learned that I could go before the appeal board tomorrow. I had just concluded my morning prayers, and was about to leave my bed area on my morning rounds, when this fellow Tweed came down the aisle. Everyone had told me he was the incorrigible one, a hopeless but cheerful idiot who was committed when he was 9 or 10. His lips were constantly trembling. There was a bit of foaming saliva trickling down his gaping jaw. I looked in a terrible fascination at him for the first time, as you might look at a bushman who would almost, but not quite pass muster as human. Tweed turned in the direction of my bed and stared right through me. It seemed to me that his eyes were all black pupil. He turned to leave for the grounds, for he had complete access to Roseridge, as I had, when I spoke. You are Tweed?" I did not expect from what the others had told me that he was capable of coherent speech, but he answered in perfect diction. "I am Tweed, just like that, unfettered with qualifiers or modifiers. Why is it I have not seen you before?" I asked. "They have kept me at work," he said very slowly. It was then that I detected what Tweed really was. He was good. He was free of the shadows, his tongue unatrophied by lies. In short, Tweed was on my side, struggling against this black pit, a shining survivor in a sea of corruption. What he meant by "they" was quite obvious. We talked most of the morning, quietly, about simple matters, but it was all truth. I must admit that Tweed is sorely limited intellectually, yet it is his very simplicity that accounts for his spotless soul. It is funny that I am the only one of exceptional capacities, of all I have observed anyway, whose mind is clean. I, of all the people have been chosen, have been made to suffer, so that I may understand his message. And now I have a humble agent, this Tweed, whom I stumbled on by accident. Accident? Perhaps not. Perhaps I was made to suffer here at Roseridge by a plan. I cannot rightly say. But surely Tweed must figure in a grand alliance against it. Perhaps, too, I have been led even closer to the source. Perhaps it is here. Anyway, we shall see. Tomorrow I go before the board for an appeal. We shall see. April 28. I have not seen Tweed today. They have kept him at work. There is something I omitted yesterday that has just occurred to me. While Tweed and I were talking, I noticed out of the corner of my eye that the nurse was looking at us uneasily. Then she ducked out of the dormitory. It is odd that I forgot this incident. I was too enraptured, no doubt, with the alliance. But I am sure now that they are trying to keep us apart, although I'm sure they don't understand my designs. I saw the Board of Appeals today. Frankly, I was disappointed with the whole affair. It was so heavily dominated by routine that I could not detect any new manifestations of evil. Except for the puzzled glances the head of Roseridge gave me, there is nothing much to report. He is a commanding figure, this Mr. Sampson. I believe that is the head's name. Very tall and thin, and a most remarkable huge shadow in his head. I don't suppose I shall ever see him again. He makes the rounds of Roseridge about twice a year, they tell me. Too bad. I should like to observe him more closely. Well, the board refused my appeal, as I expected, and I am right back where I started from. I wish I could contact Tweed. May 1. Just as I was about to despair of any action, all the while sinking into the dreadful regimen of this place, a sudden development has taken place that has altered my whole situation. Mr. Sampson has decided to stay on a while at Roseridge, because, as the grapevine has it, I have interested him. Well, he has interested me, too, and after what happened to me today, I might say Mr. Sampson has positively fascinated me. I was called into his office after my morning prayers. They're considerate that way. His huge, rickety frame even got up from the swivel chair when I came in. I sat opposite him, looking really for the first time at that tremendous black creature in his head that seemed to dominate the brain, the tongue, the very essence of the man. Mr. Samuel Stone, isn't it? His raised eyebrows almost comically appraising me. Yes, I said, not being able to take my eyes off him, even if I had wanted to. You have a most interesting record here. Mr. Sampson took out some forms, shuffled them a bit, and picked out perhaps a half-dozen sheets. Wife committed you, eh? Hell of a thing to have happen. Yes, sir. My respect for him was mounting, not in what he said, but in the fearless, playful way he said things. Let's see. You walk the streets examining people's faces. A most interesting avocation, I'd say. Like to do that myself. I waited almost impatiently for his next words as he began shuffling the sheets absently. Somehow, I was being overpowered. I could not speak. He was calling the turn, and I waited. You lost your business, I see. Too much avocation? He was taunting me now. There was something here I couldn't quite grasp. It wasn't really Sampson I was concerned about, but that damned shadow. It was as though the shadow was completely and irrecoverably in charge. I had not noted such dominance before. Don't wish to talk about that, eh? Well, a man's own affair, I suppose. He put the papers on the desk and pulled out some cards. Now, we have to give you a complete checkup, you know, to ascertain if there is anything organically unsound. Samson was lying. There, at least, I caught him. He wanted to find out my secret. It was a long and a rather thorough examination. As usual, I was judged physically fit. About your eyes, though, Mr. Stone. I took in a deep breath. They are quite extraordinary, you know. Most perceptive organs indeed. That was all he said about that, although you could tell he was asking me to supply him with the rest of it. But I was not that much fascinated by him. Before I left, however, Samson gave it one more try. I'll see you tomorrow at this same time, Mr. Stone. His fingers drummed the desk as though he were trying to remember something else to say. But I caught on to that trick of his, disarming you with apparently casual remarks. I waited for it. Ah, by the way, Mr. Stone, what do you see in those faces? I remained silent. Don't want to tell? The taunting came back into his voice. As I look on that interview in a cooler perspective, I can deduce now what it had really meant. Obviously the chips are down, the lines are drawn. He will interview with a pretense of gaining helpful knowledge about me, when actually he wants to wrench my secret from me. I must not be rash or seize upon false premises, but I can safely say that Mr. Samson is at least very close to the source of it. May 3. Today I saw Tweed, this time in the secluded garden surrounding the dormitory, where we could talk unobtrusively. He was, as usual, quite frank and open about everything I asked him. Tweed told me that he was on a kind of work holiday this week, that he liked to walk about the grounds. My first problem with him was to make him like me in his simple way, then to make him believe everything I said, which would be ultimately for his own good anyway. The former problem, it seems, is already solved. You are the only one who lets me talk, he said at one point in our conversation today. And when he said it, he smiled. They had told me he rarely smiled. Since he speaks only the truth, I believe him. Thus the latter problem, getting him to believe, as I did. I began by merely mentioning Mr. Samson. He trembled even at the sound of his name. Why do you fear Mr. Samson? I asked. Before he could answer, I put in, It's because you hate him, isn't it? I don't know, but every time I enter his room... His room? Yes, I clean his room. Excellent, I cried. He yells at me, calls me stupid. I don't like that, and sometimes he threatens me. I paused, trying to broach it to him on his level. Do you know why he does that? I began, watching his jaw fall agape. Because he hates you. You are good, and he is bad, and that is why he hates you. Again Tweed smiled. Yes, that's it all right. I had simplified it, but it was all true nonetheless. You see, Tweed, he is your enemy. Never forget that. Never. And that sunk in too. Thus I had formed the grand alliance of purity. You could tell he was thinking about it as hard as his capacities would allow. I left him with that puzzled look on his face. I could use him all right. And when he had accepted the fact that he hated Samson, there would be other things to tell him. What a stroke of luck. Tweed's being orderly of Samson's room. Now we can gather the information we need to fight him. May 4. The interviews with Samson have just about come to a head. He now is more direct, more insistent. Also, I believe he is a little more afraid of me. I can say that I am now no longer overwhelmed by him any more, thanks to my gift of greater vision. He asked me again today why I looked at the faces. Of course, he got no answer, as I maintained silence, continuing to stare at that all-consuming shadow of his. Perhaps I made it a little too obvious because he caught on to my designs, partially, at least. "Stone, are you studying me?" When I didn't answer, he coloured slightly. "By God, you are. So I'm just like all the others, those on the street." "No, not at all," I blundered. He started to laugh. "But you are studying me. I interest you too, eh?" "Yes. It would do no harm to admit it." "Well, I want you to know that these grillings will continue until you cooperate." Samson reached into his drawer, selecting a long, streamlined cigar. He paced himself beautifully while I waited, over 2 minutes to light and take the first puff from his cigar. "You know, Stone, I could let you out in a minute." He flicked at the cigar. "If you would only cooperate." "Yes, sir. Otherwise, I have the power to keep you here indefinitely." I stood up from the swivel chair. Before he ended the interview, I took another look at the shadow, and I knew for certain. "You think about that, and then you can give me your decision tomorrow." There is no doubt about it. His huge shadow, his clever trap to make me divulge the secret, his threats, he is the source. May 5. Well, now I have done it, and a pretty mess, I must say. Samson trapped me into it. How, I cannot recollect. Oh, he is clever. He began, as nearly as I can tell, by taunting me about my wife. "So you let her put one over on you, eh, Stone? And while you looked at people's faces, she got the doctors and the lawyers and had you committed. What a fine excuse you gave her to get rid of you, looking at people's faces. Dare say I blame her. Not very smart, are you, Mr. Stone?" Well, I hadn't been feeling too good that day anyway, and that speech started me off. "You are evil, Samson. Evil, hear me?" "Enough. Go to your bed." But he wasn't really angry, rather very pleased with himself as he extended that gaunt jaw into the air, blowing smoke. "See you tomorrow, Stone. That should conclude our business." When I got back from supper tonight, feeling as miserable as when Mr. George had put one over on me, who should be sitting on my bed but Tweed? Instantly the whole scheme was formulated in my mind. I could not take another interview with Samson, that was sure. And there was Tweed, with proper probing, who would see to it that I would never have another chat with Samson. It took about half an hour to convince Tweed. Since it was the truth, and he was one of the few in this world pure enough to understand it, Tweed was only too happy to help in our cause. When he left that night, I felt an overweening desire to shout. My mission at last was consummated. May 6. When the news had finally gotten around the dormitory that Samson had been stabbed, I was amazed at the outbursts of indignation and the derogations against Tweed. "They tell me that he is in solitary confinement and that he will be sent to another hospital. It is, however, a small loss in return for what he has given the world. The everlasting end of all evil. The source of it is destroyed, and these fools rage against the emancipator. But I must have patience. What I have done cannot easily be appreciated. It is too immense a deed for those without the gift. Soon they will understand. As the shadows of iniquity recede from their brains, free of the evil sustenance of the source, then will they hear the words of purity and goodness. Already I have made observations around the dormitory. While it is too early to judge, I expect a gradual receding of the shadows. This is truly a day for rejoicing. May 7. I have conducted further observations around the dormitory today. It is so discouraging, but I am much too impatient, I'm afraid. I have not noted any signs of the loosening grip of the shadow, but, as I say, I am just over-anxious. I know sincerely that this cannot have been done in vain. Tomorrow, so the grapevine says, the detectives are coming. May 8. Today we were questioned by the detectives, and a stupid lot they are. They have not come to me yet, so I cannot evaluate them scientifically. Tomorrow they will get to me for certain. I am not the least bit concerned. What I am concerned about, though, is that the shadows have not at all lost their grips on the people I have observed. On the contrary, in some cases it has even increased its dominance. What can be the matter? I must be more methodical tomorrow. Perhaps my measurements have not been dispassionate enough. May 9. Something has come up that has made me quit my dormitory observations. It is not pleasant, but I must face up to it. Today, I was questioned by the chief detective, a Mr. Henry. I had forgotten to mention yesterday, I was so engrossed in the dormitory observations, that he was a very bright fellow with a large shadow on his brain. Well, judging by today, that's only the half of it. Oh, he wasn't bright enough to get any evidence on me, but I was with him long enough to observe carefully the shadow. The most tremendous shadow I have ever seen, even larger than Mr. Sampson's. That is why this whole business is so distasteful. It proves why the tentacles of evil have not receded. I have not got to the real source. But from my observations, and they were scrupulously objective, I can tell you, Mr. Henry is the real source. It is such a pity to lose poor Tweed in an abortive cause, but, as I said before, one must face up to it, take the bull by the horns, as it were. It is surely fortuitous, too, that Mr. Henry wants to see me tomorrow at his office. That will give me the chance I need to destroy him. Of course, I shall be apprehended, but that does not matter, considering the great service I will have rendered the world. I shall receive my just rewards in eternity from far wiser counsels. It is in this that I rejoice, and in the anticipation of my act tomorrow. I have but few regrets. Tweed is one of them, although his act was valiant. Mr. Sampson was another. Considering, however, the enormity of his evil, I may safely list him as expendable. So tomorrow it will all be over. There is another thing I wish to express. I suppose I can allow myself a foolish whimsy. There was an assistant detective to Mr. Henry, whose shadow is nearly as large as Mr. Henry's. Yes, I should like to observe the assistant detective before I destroy the source. This leads me to a final comment that future historians may glean from my vast experience in this matter. Evil is rather a complex phenomenon. If you enjoyed listening today, be sure to subscribe to the channel by hitting the red subscribe button below. After doing so, click the bell icon next to the subscribe button to receive new content notifications. If you'd like to support our work and receive exclusive perks, consider becoming a channel member by clicking the join button below. To support us in other ways, see the video description for links to our Bandcamp and Patreon pages, our merch store over at Teespring, and further information relating to our releases on Audible, iTunes, and Spotify. And until next time,